For 15 years, I cooked every Thanksgiving dinner for my family. 15 years of waking before dawn, standing over hot stoves until my feet ached serving plates to people who never once said thank you. This year, my mother handed me a 3-page list. 36 guests, 12 dishes. "Start cooking at 4 a.m, she ordered, "and don't mess up this Thanksgiving. We have important people coming." I smiled and said, "Sure, Mum." But at 3 a.m, while my family slept peacefully upstairs, I wasn't in the basement kitchen chopping onions. I was sitting in an airport terminal boarding pass in hand, watching the departure screen count down to my freedom. I left a note on the counter. Just 1 page. But the words on that paper would expose a secret so devastating that my so-called perfect brother would lose everything he'd built because he built it by stealing from me. 36 relatives arrived to an empty kitchen that morning, and what they discovered wasn't just a missing meal. It was the truth about who really held that family together and who had been robbing her blind. Have you ever been invisible to the people who should love you most? My name is Ashley Reed. I'm 36 years old, the Chief Operating Officer of a logistics company in Chicago, and for most of my life I've been the daughter nobody sees. The drive from Chicago to my parents' house in suburban Ohio takes 6 hours. 6 hours of empty highways and too much time to think. But this year, I wasn't just driving home for Thanksgiving. I was driving toward answers. 6 months ago, a routine mortgage application revealed something that made my stomach drop. Credit accounts I never opened, debt I never incurred, a financial identity that had been quietly stolen while I wasn't paying attention. I hired a lawyer. I gathered documents. And now I was returning to the one place where all the evidence pointed. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, the house was already full of light and noise. I could hear laughter through the windows before I even opened my car door. I grabbed my bags, walked up the familiar front steps, and stepped inside. Nobody turned around. The entire family was gathered in the living room, clustered around my younger brother Daniel like he was a celebrity. I caught fragments of excited conversation. Series A funding, $2 million, our Daniel, a real entrepreneur. My mother Margaret stood at his side, beaming with the kind of pride she had never once directed at me. I set my bags down in the hallway. The thud echoed slightly against the hardwood floor. Still, no one looked. For 36 years, this had been my normal. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, I wasn't here to belong. I was here to watch. At dinner, the celebration continued. My mother clinked her glass and announced that Daniel had blessed the family with a brand new 75-inch television. The relatives burst into applause. Daniel ducked his head in false modesty, accepting their praise like a king receiving tribute. I stayed silent, pushing green beans around my plate, but my mind was racing. For 7 years, I had been paying my parents' bills through an automatic transfer, utilities, insurance, property taxes. Over $2,000 every single month. They never acknowledged it. I assumed they were too proud to mention it. But now, a question surfaced that I couldn't ignore if I was secretly funding this household. Where did Daniel get money for a luxury television? His startup was supposedly still in its growth phase, burning through investor cash. Something didn't add up. After dinner, the relatives began assigning tasks for Thanksgiving. Ashley, check the guest list. Ashley, confirm the menu. Ashley, make sure we have enough chairs for 36 people. The requests came rapid-fire automatic, as if I were staff rather than family. Meanwhile, Daniel settled onto the couch with a video game controller, and my mother brought him a plate of cookies without being asked. I watched him more carefully now, and I noticed something I had never noticed before. Daniel wasn't just passively accepting the favoritism, he was cultivating it. Small comments dropped like seeds. Ashley's so good at organizing things. She doesn't mind helping, she's not married, she has time. Each phrase positioned me as the worker and him as the star. It was subtle, it was deliberate, and it had probably been happening for years while I was too busy serving to see it. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone on the back porch. The November air was bitter, but I barely felt it. In my hands, I held a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother Rose. She died 10 years ago, and she was the only person in this family who ever made me feel seen. Before she passed, she wrote me a letter. I had never read it completely, leaving it for a moment when I truly needed her wisdom. Sitting in the darkness, listening to the silence of a house full of people who had forgotten I existed, I felt that moment approaching. I didn't come home to cook Thanksgiving dinner. I came home to find out who had been stealing from me, and I was beginning to suspect the answer would break my heart. The next morning came too quickly, and with it the familiar rhythm of being overlooked. Breakfast was a loud affair with relatives stopping by early, everyone fussing over Daniel and his latest business updates while I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. By evening, my parents had retreated to the living room with the rest of the family to watch football on that brand new television Daniel had supposedly bought them. I stood at the sink alone washing dishes that seemed to multiply no matter how many I cleaned. The sounds of laughter and commentary drifted in from the other room. Nobody offered to help. Nobody even asked if I wanted to join them. This was simply how things worked in the Reed household. Ashley handles the work. Everyone else enjoys the rewards. I was elbow deep in soapy water when I heard footsteps behind me. I assumed it was my mother coming to add more dishes to the pile, so I didn't turn around. But the voice that spoke wasn't my mother's. "You know why they always call you home for holidays?" I looked over my shoulder. Aunt Marlene stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She was my mother's younger sister, 62 years old, and she had always been the quiet observer at family gatherings. We had never been particularly close, but she had never been unkind to me either. She just existed on the edges, much like I did. "Because they need you," she continued, stepping closer and lowering her voice. "Not because they value you. There's a difference, Ashley. Most people never learn that difference. They spend their whole lives confusing being needed with being loved." The words hit me like cold water. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly, giving myself time to think. 6 months of investigating my stolen credit had taught me to listen carefully and reveal nothing. So I simply looked at her and waited. Marlene glanced toward the living room, confirming we were alone, then leaned against the counter beside me. "Your mother wasn't always like this, you know. When we were young, our mother, your grandmother on that side, she treated our brother like he was made of gold. Everything revolved around him. His needs, his future, his comfort. And Margaret." Marlene shook her head slowly. Margaret was invisible. She did the cooking, the cleaning, the emotional labour. She was the daughter who served while our brother was the son who shined. I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. A pattern clicking into place. "She's repeating it," I said quietly. "She became the mother who hurt her." Marlene nodded. "And you became the daughter she used to be. History doesn't just repeat itself in families, Ashley. It echoes. It passes down like a disease nobody talks about." She paused and her eyes softened slightly. "I'm not telling you this to make excuses for her. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to forgive them. It just means you can see the whole picture." I appreciated that. Too many people use psychology as a shield, explaining away cruelty as though explanation equaled absolution. Marlene wasn't doing that. She was giving me context without asking me to accept it. But then her expression changed. Something more cautious crept into her voice. "I've watched this family for years," she said. "The favoritism toward Daniel has always been obvious. But lately I've started to wonder if it's entirely your mother's doing." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. or if someone learned to cultivate it, to encourage it, to use it. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? I'm not accusing anyone directly. I don't have enough proof for that. But I've noticed things. The way Daniel steers conversations, the way he positions himself as the golden child while quietly making sure you stay in the background. She looked at me directly. And I think it involves money, Ashley. Your money. I kept my face neutral, but inside my mind was racing. She didn't know about my investigation. She didn't know about the fraudulent accounts or the 6 months I had spent gathering evidence, and yet she had arrived at the same suspicion through pure observation. What kind of things have you noticed? I asked. Marlene shook her head. Not here, not now, but I've kept records over the years. Documents, messages, things that seemed strange at the time, but I didn't have anyone to tell. She reached out and touched my arm briefly. Come find me tomorrow. I'll show you what I have. I think you deserve to know. And I think... She trailed off, then finished quietly. I think you're the only one in this family strong enough to do something about it. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps approached from the hallway. Marlene straightened up and moved toward the refrigerator, pretending to look for something. My mother appeared in the doorway. Ashley, we need more ice, she said without greeting. And make sure the guest bathroom has fresh towels before you go to bed. Of course, I said automatically. My mother disappeared back toward the living room without another word. Marlene caught my eye one more time, gave me a small nod, and followed her out. I stood alone in the kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on me. For 6 months, I had assumed the identity theft was random. Some stranger who got hold of my social security number. Some faceless criminal operating from a distant computer. That narrative had been easier to accept. Impersonal. Unlucky, but not personal. But what if it wasn't random at all? What if the person who stole my identity, who opened accounts in my name, who buried me in debt I never created, was someone who sat at this very dinner table? Someone who smiled at me across holiday meals while quietly draining everything I had worked for. I thought about Daniel's confident grin, his new television, his startup that somehow kept finding money despite being in a growth phase. I thought about my mother's blind devotion to him and her complete dismissal of me. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I stared at the ceiling and couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, Marlene would show me what she had gathered. Tomorrow, I might finally have proof. And if my suspicions were right, the person who had been robbing me blind wasn't a stranger at all. It was my own brother. Sleep never came that night. I lay in the darkness, replaying every interaction, every holiday, every moment when Daniel smiled at me while I worked and he rested. By the time grey morning light crept through the curtains, I had already made my decision. Today, I would stop wondering and start confirming. If my own brother had been stealing from me, I needed proof that would hold up in court. I was still in bed when my mother knocked once and opened the door without waiting for an answer. She stood in the doorway, holding a stack of papers, her expression tight, with the particular stress she always carried before hosting events. Here's the preparation list for tomorrow, she said, thrusting the pages toward me. 36 guests, 12 dishes. I've noted the dietary requirements for everyone. Mrs. Patterson is diabetic. The Hendersons are gluten-free, and your cousin Mark decided he's vegan now, so figure that out. I took the papers without comment. 3 full pages of demands written in my mother's precise handwriting. You'll cook in the basement kitchen, she continued. The main kitchen needs to stay clean for when guests arrive. We can't have them seeing a mess when they walk in. Appearances matter, Ashley. I nodded, scanning the list. Start at 4 a.m. Turkey ham, 3 types of potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls, 2 pies, a vegan option that had been added as an afterthought at the bottom. Enough food for a small army prepared entirely by one person who would receive no credit and no thanks. As my mother turned to leave, I caught movement in the hallway behind her. Daniel stood there, coffee cup in hand, watching the exchange. Our eyes met briefly. He didn't look sympathetic, he didn't look mocking. He looked satisfied, like a chess player watching pieces move exactly according to plan. Then, he turned and walked away, and my mother left without noticing him at all. I sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone. The email I had been waiting for had arrived overnight. My lawyer's full investigation report. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood every word. We've confirmed 7 credit accounts opened using your social security number. The report began. 3, you knowingly authorized a co-signature on your brother Daniel's college loan in 2018, a co-signature on your parents' car loan in 2019, and a home improvement credit line in 2020 that you agreed to help establish. I remembered those. I had signed willingly, wanting to help my family build their futures. But the next paragraph changed everything. 4 additional accounts were opened without your knowledge or consent using your social security number and what appear to be forged signatures. These accounts total $127,000 in accumulated debt. The accounts constitute federal identity theft, which is classified as a serious felony under United States law. Notably, the unauthorized accounts were opened systematically over 4 years, each approximately 8 to 12 months apart. This pattern suggests deliberate planning rather than impulsive or desperate fraud. Someone was testing how much they could take without triggering detection. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. $127,000 stolen in my name by someone who knew my social security number, my signature, my personal information, someone close enough to access those details without raising suspicion. That evening, while my father was at a neighbor's house watching a game, and my mother was busy directing Daniel on where to place extra chairs, I slipped into the small office at the back of the house. My father kept a filing cabinet there stuffed with years of documents he never organized. I found what I was looking for in the 3rd drawer. The autopay records I had set up 7 years ago were all there, neatly filed by year. I had agreed to cover some household expenses when my career started taking off, thinking I was helping my parents through a difficult time. But the amounts were higher than I remembered. Much higher. Utilities, insurance premiums, property taxes, maintenance fees. Over $2,000 extras every single month, pulled automatically from my account without discussion or acknowledgement. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the auto-pay records, I found bank statements. Not my parents' statements. Daniel's. Deposits that lined up almost perfectly with dates when my mother had called me about family emergencies. The time the furnace supposedly broke. The month when property taxes came due unexpectedly. The emergency car repair that couldn't wait. Each time I had sent extra money without question. Each time a suspiciously similar amount had appeared in Daniel's account within days. He knew. He knew exactly what I was giving because he was tracking it. He had positioned himself at the center of the family's finances, monitoring my contributions while making sure I never received credit for any of them. The television he supposedly bought our parents, probably purchased with money I had sent for the roof repair, that never happened. I did the math in my head and felt sick. $2,000 monthly for 7 years equaled $168,000 in direct bill payments. Add the $127,000 in fraudulent accounts. Nearly $300,000 had been extracted from me over the course of a decade. And what did I have to show for it? A seat at the children's table during holidays. An endless list of chores while Daniel played video games. A family that looked through me like I was made of glass. The identity theft wasn't random. It wasn't my parents making desperate mistakes during hard times. The systematic timing, the careful amounts designed to stay below thresholds that would trigger fraud alerts, the way the theft escalated as my income grew, it was all too precise to be coincidence. This was architected. Engineered by someone who understood money, who understood systems, who understood exactly how to exploit a family member's trust. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. and left the office silently. Tomorrow, I would meet with Aunt Marlene. She had promised to show me what she had gathered over the years. I knew now what had been stolen and how much it totaled. Tomorrow, I would learn who designed the blueprint, and I suspected the answer would shatter whatever was left of my heart. The meeting with Aunt Marlene had been brief but devastating. She handed me a folder and told me to read it alone somewhere private where I could process what I was about to learn. She said she would find me later that night after everyone else had gone to bed to answer my questions. So, I waited. I performed my role. I nodded when my mother gave instructions and smiled when relatives asked how I was doing. And when the clock struck 10 and my mother announced it was time to start preparing ingredients for tomorrow's feast, I took the 3-page list and descended into the basement kitchen without complaint. The basement was cold. The heating system down here had never worked properly, and nobody had bothered to fix it because nobody important ever spent time here. I set up my workspace at the old wooden table, surrounded by bags of potatoes and onions, and the massive turkey that would take hours to prepare. Above me, I could hear footsteps and laughter. The family was still gathered in the living room, probably watching television, probably eating snacks that someone else would clean up later. No one came down to check on me. No one called to ask if I needed help carrying the heavy supplies. No one even acknowledged that I was down here in the cold, beginning work that wouldn't end until tomorrow afternoon. I used to interpret this as thoughtlessness. My family was simply careless, I told myself. They didn't mean to exclude me. They just forgot I existed when I wasn't standing directly in front of them. But tonight, with everything I had learned, I saw it differently. This wasn't accidental neglect. This was design. Keep Ashley busy. Keep Ashley separate. Keep Ashley invisible. The question I couldn't answer yet was who had designed it. Just before 11, I heard soft footsteps on the basement stairs. Aunt Marlene appeared at the bottom, checking over her shoulder before crossing to where I stood peeling potatoes. She held a manila folder against her chest like it contained something precious or dangerous. Maybe both. "I promised to explain how I got these," she said quietly, setting the folder on the table between us. 4 years ago, I was visiting your parents when the mail arrived. Your mother was busy with something, so I brought it inside. There was a credit card statement addressed to you. I thought it was strange since you haven't lived here in over a decade. I mentioned it to Daniel since he was nearby. She paused and something hardened in her expression. He didn't even flinch, didn't look surprised or confused. He just smiled, confident, like I'd caught him doing something clever instead of something wrong. I set down the potato peeler and gave her my full attention. "He told me you had excellent credit," Marlene continued. "Said you never checked your statements anyway, so it didn't matter. He asked me to stay quiet about it for the family's sake. Said it would only cause drama if I mentioned it to anyone." She opened the folder and spread several printed pages across the table. Then he followed up with these emails, making sure I understood that this was family business, private, not to be discussed. I looked at the printouts, email exchanges between Marlene and Daniel from 4 years ago. In them, Daniel casually mentioned being listed as an authorized user on several of my credit accounts. He described making purchases. He thanked Marlene for her discretion. He never once expressed guilt or concern about using accounts that belonged to his sister. "He knew," I said slowly. "He wasn't just receiving benefits from Mom's favoritism. He was actively using my credit without permission." Marlene nodded. "These emails prove he participated, but..." She hesitated. "But what?" Opening entirely new accounts in someone's name requires more than just being an authorized user on existing cards. It takes social security numbers, forged signatures, sometimes fake addresses. That's identity theft at a federal level. These emails show Daniel using your accounts, but they don't prove he opened new ones. I thought about the lawyer's report. 4 unauthorized accounts totaling $127,000. Forged signatures. systematic timing. "Do you think Mom initiated it?" I asked. "She handles the family finances. She would have access to my documents. Maybe Daniel just went along with something she started." Marlene was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. "That's what I assumed at first. Your mother has always been controlling about money. But Ashley, I've watched Daniel manage your mother for 20 years. He knows exactly how to plant ideas in her head and make her think they were her own. He's been doing it since he was a teenager, getting her to buy him things to excuse his behavior, to prioritize his needs over everyone else's." She looked at me directly. "I can't prove who started this scheme, but I have one more piece of evidence that I haven't shown you yet." "Show me now." She shook her head. "Not tonight. I want to reveal it tomorrow in front of the immediate family, so no one can deny it or spin it into something else. Daniel is too good at talking his way out of things when it's just one person confronting him. But in front of witnesses," she almost smiled, "even he can't charm his way out of written proof. Can you at least tell me what it is?" "It's an email," she said, "one that makes very clear who designed this entire arrangement. Trust me until tomorrow. Can you do that?" I looked around the cold basement, the mountain of ingredients waiting to be transformed into a feast for 36 people who would never thank me. The documents proving my brother had been stealing from me for years. The clock on the wall showing 11:47. I had spent 36 years being invisible to this family. Tomorrow, I would make sure they never forgot I existed. But first, I had a choice to make. About how I left, about what message I wanted to send, about whether I would simply disappear or leave behind something that would force them to finally see me. The answer was already forming in my mind. Aunt Marlene left me alone with my thoughts and a decision that would change everything. I stood in the basement surrounded by ingredients I had no intention of preparing, listening to the silence of a house that had fallen asleep without noticing I was still awake. The clock on the wall showed midnight. In less than 4 hours, my mother expected me to begin cooking a feast for 36 people. She expected me to stand in this cold basement until my feet ached preparing food that would be eaten by relatives who wouldn't remember my name serving a family that had been stealing from me for years. I sat down on an overturned crate and let the silence press against me. My mother's voice echoed through decades of memory. "Family comes first. The eldest must sacrifice. Don't be selfish, Ashley. Think of others before yourself." For 36 years, these phrases had programmed my behavior. They were the operating system of my existence, installed so early that I never questioned whether they were true or fair. I simply obeyed. I cooked and cleaned and paid bills and asked for nothing because that was what good daughters did. But tonight, those same words sounded different. They weren't wisdom passed down through generations. They were tools designed to keep me compliant. Tools that ensured I would always give and never question why I received nothing in return. My mother had learned them from her own mother, the grandmother who treated her like a servant while her brother lived like a prince. Margaret knew what it felt like to be invisible. She knew the pain of being overlooked and undervalued. And instead of breaking that cycle, she had passed it directly to me. I understood why. Hurt people often hurt others. Children who are neglected sometimes grow up to neglect their own children, not out of cruelty, but out of a failure to imagine anything different. But understanding is not the same as excusing. My mother's painful childhood explained her behavior. It did not justify it, and it certainly did not obligate me to keep suffering in silence. I thought about my real life, the one that existed 300 miles away in Chicago, the one my family refused to acknowledge or celebrate. I was the chief operating officer of a growing logistics company. I managed teams. I solved problems. I earned the respect of colleagues who saw my contributions and valued my leadership. I had built my success through competence and hard work and integrity, not through manipulation or theft. When I gave to my family, I gave out of love, expecting nothing in return, except perhaps a little recognition. A thank you, an acknowledgement that I existed. Instead, someone in this house had built their success by stealing mine. Nearly $300,000 extracted over a decade, while I was called the ordinary one, the unmarried daughter with nothing important to do, the family work horse who could always be counted on to serve. The contrast was clarifying. I was not the failure they painted me to be. I never was. I reached into my bag and pulled out my grandmother's keepsake box. Inside, nestled among old photographs and dried flowers, was the letter she had written before she died. I had carried it with me for 10 years, reading only the first few lines, saving the rest for a moment when I truly needed her guidance. Tonight was that moment. I unfolded the yellowed paper carefully and read the words she had written in her elegant, shaky handwriting. My dear Ashley, if you're reading this fully, you've reached a crossroads. I know you. You give too much and ask too little. So let me give you permission. Loving yourself is not selfish. Leaving is not failure. You don't owe loyalty to people who have never been loyal to you. There's something else I must tell you. In this family, not everyone's love is what it seems. Some people give, some people take, and some people are very good at making the taking look like giving. I've watched it happen for years and it breaks my heart. Trust your instincts, my dear. You've always seen more than you let on. When the time comes to act, act without guilt. You have my blessing and my pride, whatever you decide. With all my love, Grandmother Rose. I read the letter twice, letting each sentence sink into my bones. Grandmother Rose had seen something wrong in this family long before I did. She couldn't name it specifically, or perhaps she chose not to, wanting me to discover the truth on my own terms. But she had given me the only thing that truly mattered. Permission. Permission to leave without guilt. Permission to choose myself without feeling like a traitor. Permission to walk away from people who had never truly loved me, only used me. I checked my phone. The flight I had booked 3 days ago was confirmed for 5:30 in the morning. My lawyer was standing by to send formal notifications to the credit bureaus and relevant authorities first thing Monday. Everything was already in place. I had planned this exit before I even arrived, hoping I wouldn't need it, knowing deep down that I would. The question was no longer whether to leave. That decision had been made months ago, the moment I discovered accounts in my name that I never opened. The question now was how to leave. Would I slip away in silence, disappearing before dawn like a ghost they would barely notice was gone, or would I leave behind something they couldn't ignore? A message that would force them to finally see me, even if only in my absence. I looked at the mountain of unpeeled potatoes. The turkey still wrapped in plastic. The list of 12 dishes and 36 guests and one daughter expected to make it all happen alone. The clock showed 2 in the morning. I stood up slowly, brushed flour from my hands, and walked toward the basement stairs without looking back at the kitchen I would never cook in again. I was not running from my family. For the first time in my life, I was running toward myself. I climbed the basement stairs quietly, avoiding the 3rd step from the top that always creaked. The house was silent around me, filled with the deep breathing of people who had no idea their world was about to collapse. I moved through the darkened hallway like a shadow, gathering my belongings from the guest room where I had slept for the past 2 nights. My suitcase was still mostly packed. I had never fully unpacked some part of me, knowing even then that I wouldn't be staying long. I took only what belonged to me. My clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, my grandmother's keepsake box. I left behind the gifts I had brought for family members who didn't deserve them. I left behind the dress I had planned to wear for Thanksgiving dinner. I left behind 36 years of hoping that someday they would see me. Someday they would appreciate me. Someday they would love me the way I had always loved them. Before going back upstairs, I returned to the basement one last time. The ingredients I had begun preparing were still spread across the work table. Potatoes half peeled, onions waiting to be diced, the turkey still in its packaging. Part of me wanted to leave it all exactly as it was, a chaotic mess that would greet my mother when she came down expecting a feast in progress. But that wasn't who I was. Wasting food contradicted everything I believed in, and I refused to let their cruelty change my values. So I stored everything neatly in the refrigerator. The potatoes went into water to prevent browning. The vegetables were wrapped and organised. The turkey was placed on the bottom shelf where it would stay cold. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for myself because abandoning my principles would mean letting them take something else from me. Then, I sat down at the kitchen table upstairs and wrote my note. I chose each word carefully, aiming for clarity without drama. I didn't want to sound bitter or vengeful. I wanted to sound like exactly what I was, a woman who had finally decided to stop accepting less than she deserved. To my family. For 15 years, I have cooked every holiday meal for this family. No one ever said thank you. For 7 years, I have paid over $2,000 monthly toward this household's bills. No one knew or bothered to ask why the bills were always covered. Without my knowledge or consent, someone used my social security number to open $127,000 in fraudulent debt. I have documentation. My lawyer has documentation. This is not a misunderstanding. It is federal identity theft. Through all of this, I was called the ordinary one, while others took credit for my contributions. Today, I choose myself. I am not asking for apologies. I am not seeking revenge. I am simply done being invisible. What happens next is not my punishment to deliver. It is your consequence to face. Ashley. I read it twice, then folded it and placed it on the counter where my mother would find it when she came down to start her day. Right next to the coffee maker. She wouldn't be able to miss it. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Aunt Marlene. I'm leaving now. I trust you to reveal the full truth when the family gathers. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I didn't expect a response at this hour, but my phone buzzed almost immediately. I'll handle it, Marlene wrote back. When they read your note, they'll panic. When they try to spin it, I'll show them what I have. Your grandmother would be so proud. Safe travels, dear. I felt tears prick my eyes, but didn't let them fall. There would be time, Gert, for crying later. Right now, I needed to be strong. I sent one more message, this time to my lawyer. Proceed with formal notifications. Monday, credit bureaus, fraud alerts, and documentation to all account holders. His response came within minutes, professional and precise. Confirmed. Everything will be filed first thing Monday morning. Stay safe. I called a taxi and waited outside in the cold November air, watching my breath form small clouds that disappeared into the darkness. The house behind me was silent and peaceful, its occupants dreaming of turkey and gratitude and the performance of family togetherness they would put on for 36 guests in just a few hours. They had no idea that the performance was about to be cancelled. The taxi arrived and I climbed in without looking back. The driver made small talk about the holiday, about family, about travelling at strange hours. I gave short answers and watched Ohio pass by outside the window. Strip malls and gas stations and neighbourhoods full of houses where other families were sleeping, preparing for their own Thanksgiving celebrations. I wondered how many of those houses contained secrets like mine. How many invisible daughters were waking up early to cook meals no one would thank them for. I reached the airport just after 4 a.m. The terminal was nearly empty, a few tired travellers scattered among the plastic chairs, everyone waiting for flights to somewhere else. I found a seat near my gate and checked my phone. The family group chat was silent, everyone still asleep. In 4 hours, 36 guests would arrive at my parents' house expecting a feast. they would find empty tables and a note that would change everything they thought they knew about the Reed family. When my flight began boarding, I walked onto the plane without hesitation. I took my seat by the window and watched the ground crew moving in the pre-dawn darkness. The engines hummed to life, the safety announcements played, and then we were moving, accelerating down the runway, lifting off into a sky that was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of sunrise. As Ohio shrank below me, becoming smaller and smaller until it disappeared beneath the clouds, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The peace of finally mattering to myself. The peace of choosing my own worth over their approval. Below, in a quiet suburban house, a note waited on a kitchen counter. A feast waited uncooked in the refrigerator. And a truth waited to be revealed, one that would expose everything and bring the Reed family's carefully constructed lies crashing down around them. I landed in Chicago just as the sun was fully rising over the city. The airport was busier now, filled with travelers, rushing to make connections and families reuniting for the holiday. I moved through the terminal slowly, in no hurry to be anywhere. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I had nowhere I was supposed to be, and no one I was supposed to serve. The feeling was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. I took a taxi to my apartment and let myself in. The space was quiet and clean, exactly as I had left it. I set down my bags, made a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching the city wake up. Somewhere 300 miles away, my family was waking up too. And they were about to discover that their invisible daughter had finally made herself seen. The first text from Aunt Marlene came just after 8 in the morning. Your mother found the note. I could hear her scream from upstairs. I stared at the message, trying to imagine the scene. My mother descending to the kitchen, expecting the warmth of a fire, already burning the smell of turkey, already roasting her eldest daughter, already working. Instead, she found cold silence and a folded piece of paper that would shatter everything she thought she knew. More messages followed in rapid succession. Marlene was giving me a play-by-play, and I found myself grateful for her presence, even as I felt distant from the chaos she described. Guests are starting to arrive. No one knows what to do. Your mother is hysterical. Daniel is trying to take charge. The note is being passed around. People are reading it out loud. I can hear them whispering about the money. I could picture it perfectly. 36 relatives showing up in their holiday best, expecting a feast and a performance of happy family togetherness. Instead, they found empty tables, bewildered hosts, and a note accusing someone in the family of federal identity theft. The perfect image my parents had cultivated for decades was cracking in real time, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Marlene's next message made my heart beat faster. Daniel is in full damage control mode. He's telling everyone you're having some kind of mental breakdown, saying you've always been dramatic and emotional. Some people are nodding along. I felt a flash of anger. Of course Daniel would try to spin this. Of course he would paint me as the unstable one, the crazy sister making wild accusations. He had been controlling the narrative about me for years. Why would he stop now? For a moment, according to Marlene, it seemed like his strategy might work. He's so smooth, she wrote. He's got your mother clinging to his arm. A few of the older relatives are already saying they always knew you were jealous of Daniel's success. He might actually survive this. Then came the message I had been waiting for. I'm stepping in now. Wish me luck. I set my phone down and stared out the window. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I had given Marlene the truth, and she had evidence to back it up. The rest was up to her. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I made another cup of coffee and tried not to check my phone every 10 seconds. Finally, it buzzed with a long message. I pulled the immediate family into the kitchen. Your parents, Daniel, and 3 of the aunts who witnessed everything. I told them I had something they needed to see before anyone decided what to believe. Then I read the emails out loud. All of them. She had attached screenshots. I scrolled through them slowly, seeing the words Daniel had written 4 years ago laid out in black and white. The first email was the one she had shown me in the basement, where Daniel explained how he had figured out my auto-pay arrangement and convinced our mother to add him to my credit accounts. But it was the second email that made my breath catch in my throat. It was addressed to our mother, and it read, "Mum, I got the TV using Ashley's Visa account. When the family asks, just say I bought it as a gift. Ashley doesn't come to family events anyway. She won't hear what we tell people. And honestly, she doesn't need the recognition. She's not building anything. I'm here, I'm visible, I should get the credit. Trust me, she'll never find out." I read those words 3 times. I had suspected Daniel was involved. I had even suspected he was more than just a passive beneficiary. But seeing it written in his own hand, the casual cruelty of it, the calculated way he had positioned himself to receive praise for my sacrifices, it hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't a son who went along with his mother's bad decisions because he didn't know any better. This was a son who taught his mother how to steal from her own daughter, how to lie to the family, how to make him look like a hero, while I remained invisible. Daniel didn't just participate in the scheme, he architected it. Marlene's next message described the aftermath. The room went completely silent when I finished reading. Your mother looked like she was going to faint. And your father, he spoke for the first time all morning. He looked at Daniel and said, How long have you been doing this?" Daniel started to answer, started doing that thing he does, where he explains everything away. But your father cut him off. He said, "Don't. I don't want another performance." There was more. Daniel's girlfriend, the one he had been planning to propose to this weekend, quietly picked up her purse and said she needed some air. She walked out the front door, and according to Marlene, she never came back. Within hours, the extended family knew everything spread not by Marlene, but by the shocked relatives who had witnessed the unmasking. The golden child's shine had finally worn off, and what lay beneath was rotten. I put my phone down and sat in silence for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired and sad and strangely empty. These were people I had loved, people I had sacrificed for, and they had used me, lied about me, stolen from me, all while smiling at me across holiday tables. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself, a simple roast chicken using my grandmother's recipe, the one she had taught me when I was 12 years old. I set my small table with a single place setting and ate in the quiet of my own apartment, surrounded by the life I had built through my own hard work and integrity. 300 miles away, the Reed family house sat dark. No Thanksgiving dinner, no celebration, just the wreckage of a decade of lies. And here in my small kitchen in Chicago, I had the most peaceful Thanksgiving of my entire life. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Chicago, blanketing the city in snow that muffled the noise and made everything feel quiet and new. I sat by my apartment window on a February morning, watching the flakes drift down over the skyline, a cup of coffee warming my hands. My phone lay on the table beside me, its screen dark but heavy with evidence of a family desperately trying to reach me. 67 missed calls from my mother, 34 from my father, 22 from Daniel. I had answered none of them. This wasn't punishment. It was protection. I had learned through painful experience that some people interpret any engagement as an opportunity to manipulate, to explain away, to draw you back into patterns that nearly destroyed you. My silence was my boundary, and I owed them no explanation for it. They had spent 36 years ignoring my voice. Now they could experience what that silence felt like from the other side. Through Aunt Marlene, I learned what had happened in the months since Thanksgiving. The consequences had been swift and thorough, not because I had orchestrated them, but because lies built on stolen foundations eventually collapse under their own weight. Daniel's investors discovered the fraud investigation during routine due diligence for his startup's next funding round. They dug deeper and found something worse. Some of Daniel's initial capital, the money he had used to launch the company that was supposed to make him a success, could be traced to credit lines fraudulently opened in my name. His entire empire was built on identity theft. The legal and reputational risk was too high for serious investors. They withdrew their support within 6 weeks. To settle my civil claims, cover the fraudulent debts, and pay the mounting legal fees, Daniel had to sell 51% of his equity. The golden child, who had positioned himself as a visionary entrepreneur, was now a minority shareholder in his own company, reporting to investors who looked at him with barely concealed contempt. His girlfriend, the one who had walked out on Thanksgiving, ended things permanently. She told mutual friends she couldn't trust someone capable of that kind of deception. Daniel didn't just lose money. He lost everything he had built his identity around. My parents faced their own reckoning. To pay their portion of the fraudulent debt, they had to take out a home equity loan against the house they had lived in for 30 years. The extended family, the same relatives who had gathered around that Thanksgiving table expecting a feast, had largely stopped contact. Nobody wanted to be associated with the Reeds anymore. And my mother, according to Marlene, had finally started therapy. For the first time in her life, she was confronting the generational trauma she had inherited from her own mother and passed directly to me. I chose not to cooperate with the federal prosecutors on the identity theft charges, not out of forgiveness, out of pragmatism. The civil settlement was faster and cleaner, and it allowed me to move forward without years of legal proceedings hanging over my head. Daniel avoided prison, but he didn't avoid consequences. Sometimes I had learned that was enough. When Marlene told me all of this, I waited for some strong emotion to hit me. Triumph, vindication, perhaps even guilt. But what I felt was surprisingly neutral. No joy at their suffering. No regret for my choices. The consequences they faced came from their own actions. I had simply stopped shielding them from reality. For 36 years, I had tried to earn love through sacrifice, never understanding that people who require your invisibility are not capable of truly loving you. Now I surrounded myself with people who saw me clearly, colleagues who valued my leadership, friends who celebrated my successes, a therapist who helped me understand that my worth was never the problem. Their perception was. One afternoon, in late February, a package arrived from Ohio. The return address showed a name I hadn't expected: Great Uncle Harold, 78 years old, the quietest member of our extended family. I couldn't remember the last time he had spoken more than a few words to me at any gathering. I opened the package carefully and found a handwritten note on plain paper. Dear Ashley, I've been silent for too many years and I'm ashamed of that. I want you to know that I remember. I remember how you cared for your grandmother when no one else made time. I remember you sitting by her hospital bed every night during your college finals, reading to her, holding her hand. I remember how she talked about you constantly in her final weeks. She said you were her greatest pride, that you had inherited her strength, not just her eyes. You were always the heart of this family. The rest of us just couldn't see past Daniel's shine, to notice the person actually holding everything together. I'm sorry I never said this while it could have helped. I'm saying it now. I see you. I always saw you. And I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Your grandmother would be too, Uncle Harold. I read the note 3 times. Then I let myself cry. Really cry for the first time since leaving Ohio. These weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of being seen, of finally receiving words I had waited 36 years to hear. I placed Uncle Harold's note beside my grandmother's letter in the keepsake box. 2 people across the span of my life who had seen me clearly. It was a small number, but it was enough. It was proof that my invisibility was never about my inadequacy. It was about their blindness. The following weekend, I hosted my first Thanksgiving dinner. 3 months late and entirely on purpose. A small gathering filled my apartment. 2 close friends, a colleague who had become like a sister Aunt Marlene, who drove from Ohio, and great Uncle Harold, who flew in as a surprise. 6 people around a table meant for 12. I cooked every dish myself, not out of obligation, but out of joy. When we raised our glasses, Marlene offered a toast. "To Ashley," she said, "who finally learned that the people worth cooking for are the ones who see you while you're doing it." That night, after everyone left, I washed dishes in my own kitchen, in my own home, surrounded by the warmth of genuine connection. The cycle was broken, the boundaries were set, and I had finally learned the most important truth of my life. I was never invisible. I was just surrounded by people who chose not to look. Now I was surrounded by people who did, and that had made all the difference. And so ends the story of Ashley Reed, the invisible daughter, who finally chose to see herself when no one else would. For 36 years, she gave everything to a family that took her sacrifices for granted. She paid their bills in silence. She cooked their meals without thanks. She let them call her ordinary, while her own brother built his dreams on money stolen from her name. But on one cold Thanksgiving morning, she stopped waiting to be seen. She stopped hoping they would change. She walked away not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. And in doing so, she discovered something beautiful. The people truly worth loving are the ones who love you back without requiring you to disappear so they can shine. Ashley's story reminds us that setting boundaries is not selfish. Walking away from toxic relationships is not failure. And choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else is not betrayal. It is survival. It is healing. It is the first step toward building a life surrounded by people who actually see you for who you truly are. Maybe you recognize something in Ashley's journey. Maybe you have been the one cooking every holiday meal while others took the credit. Maybe you have family members who only call when they need something from you. Maybe you have spent years feeling invisible in your own home, wondering if you would ever matter to the people who are supposed to love you most. If any part of this story touched your heart, I want you to know you are not alone, and you deserve to be seen. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took you for granted? Have you ever walked away from a situation that was draining your spirit? Or are you still searching for the courage to put yourself first? Whatever your experience, please share it with our community. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this video moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. We share new tales of strength, resilience, and justice. Every week, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and remember, you are never invisible. You are just surrounded by people who chose not to look. Now go find the ones who will.